He walked in 2 hours earlier than expected. The rain had made the drive quiet, and the house, which usually announced his arrival with polished lights and whispered staff, felt unusually still. He closed the front door behind him, expecting the distant echo of a residence that was his in name and investment, not in habit. He wanted to see his son before a week of meetings overseas swallowed him. From the hallway he heard a soft humming. It wasn't the hotel's kind of lullaby, it was something plain and human, the tuning of someone who knew how to soothe a child with voice and hands. He followed the sound and stopped at the doorway to the living room, and paused because the sight was not the one he had rehearsed for himself in boardrooms and in headlines. On the rug at the center of his modern living space, the maid was sitting cross-legged with his son. The boy's stuffed bear had a torn seam along one arm. He was 4 with a laugh like a bell and hair must buy play. The maid, the woman who kept the house functioning while he traded time for deals, had thread and needle in hand. She worked with the slow concentration of someone mending not just fabric but a small sorrow. For a moment he felt a flare of irritation. Whoever had given her permission. Staff had rules, and in his world rules were how chaos was managed. Then the boy laughed, and something like relief and longing uncoiled in his chest. He watched the woman stitch a patch, press her lips to the bear as if blessing it, and hand it back. The boy hugged the toy, and then his face brightened in a way no title could buy. He stepped forward the way intruders step when they are also fathers. The boy leapt up and shouted, "Daddy," and ran into his arms with the uncalculated abandon of a child who believed in the steady return of parents. The scent of bubble bath and jam on a small shirt filled the space between them. For the first time in a long string of absences he felt like a man who could be held for who he was, not who he was expected to be. The maid rose and smoothed her apron. Her hands were small and knuckled from work that called for attention rather than applause. He noticed the faint flecks of thread and the softness that clung to the air after she had been near a child. He wanted to assert control, protocols, notifications, a report, and the sentence left his mouth sharper than he intended. "Why didn't anyone call me?" She didn't flinch at the edge of his tone. "He was crying," she said. "His bear came apart. He wouldn't let it go. I thought he'd sleep better if it was fixed." The answer was simple and unadorned. There was no rehearsal in it. It wasn't the script of deference he was used to, it was an explanation that insisted on its own reason. His defenses lost focus. He realized he'd been measuring his fathering in flights and presents on calendars, and in the ledger of accomplishments, not in the small ministrations that make a child feel safe. He watched as she poured warm milk, as she settled the boy with his patched bear and hummed a lullaby he couldn't place. The sound stitched him too. "What's your name?" he asked, because the moment felt too personal to let slip by unnamed. "Lena," she said. "Lena Alvarez. I've worked nights these last months. He sleeps easier when I'm here." He had seen her in the hallways, efficient, mute, a background figure who kept things running. He had paid her wages. He had not paid attention. On impulse he asked, "How long have you known him?" She blinked. "Not long. Enough. Sometimes the house is loud and sleepy at the same time." He looked out the window often. "I stayed." He needed someone. He could have ordered reprimands. He could have called a meeting about protocol and chain of command. Instead he found himself learning, slowly, like a man who kept new books on his shelf but hadn't read them yet. He sat on the couch and allowed the normality of bedtime to unfold. His son shifted and breathed deeper, and sleep took him, weighty and honest. When the boy was finally asleep he watched Lena tuck the blanket with the exact patience of someone who had learned rituals might matter more than rules. He thought of the small bandage on the boy's eyebrow and of the nights he had missed. First nights in new rooms, small fevers, the way a scraped knee can feel like a canyon to a child. He had given money and services. He had given the boy schedules. He had not always given the presence that soothed fear. The next morning the man spoke to the house manager. He read incident logs and payroll and learned that while protocols existed, they were thin around the edges where human need lived. The manager's words were careful, but none of their carefulness described the patched bear or the lullaby. Papers could be filed. What Lena had given could not. He found Lena folding laundry on the second floor, a quiet posture that made heavy things look tidy. He wanted to thank her and also to set boundaries he could understand. "I appreciate what you did," he said. "But if something happens, tell someone." He thought the words would be received as relief or at least compliance. She looked up. Her face had the plain warmth of someone whose life had been carved into acts of service and care. "I will," she said. "I will tell the manager." But he needed someone. "I couldn't let him sleep without his bear." Her reply had an honesty that disarmed him. The room did not need his authority to be valid. It needed people who would stay. He realized then that power could be gentle if it chose to be, and that gratitude could be an act of leadership as much as a memo. Over the following weeks, things changed in small ways. He reworked a calendar to carve out ordinary hours. He started answering bedtime video calls without letting business creep in. Sometimes he arrived home early. Sometimes he read the same book twice. Lena continued to do her job with the same humility and carefulness, and the household adjusted like a fabric remembering its shape. One evening some months later he returned unannounced and found Lena and his son watching the rain in silence. The bear, now fully mended, sat between them. He lingered in the doorway, but this time the sight felt like a blessing rather than an intrusion. He walked in, sat down, and took his son's small hand. "Thank you," he said to Lena, meaning it. She smiled softly. "He's brave," she said. "He just needs people who stay." The sentence sat between them like a small truth. He thought of the balance sheets and the contracts that had defined so much of his life and realized a different ledger had been opened. One of presence and small mercies. It did not cancel his other obligations, but it changed the weights and the way success was counted in their house. Later, as he folded his son's artwork into a drawer, he found a crayon drawing of 3 figures under a sun. One figure had a broad line of color where the bear was held, stitched with a crayon seam that was proud and obvious. He pinned it to the refrigerator without ceremony. It was a quiet acknowledgement. He never replaced rules entirely with improvised tenderness. He still required safety and structure. But he learned to value the seam menders, the people who noticed what was torn and fixed it without waiting for permission. He increased Lena's hours, added a line to her pay that recognized extra nights, and started a weekly meal where staff and family ate together. That small change rippled outward. The house felt less like a gilded hotel and more like a place with shared responsibilities and shared warmth. He was still a man who traveled and made decisions that tilted markets, but within these walls, something else measured him. The number of nights he had stayed, the stories he kept, the small hands that still reached for him. Sometimes the most unexpected returns are not about catching someone in the wrong. They are about seeing what you have been missing. The night he found the maid sewing a bear was a small occasion with a large consequence. It taught him that authority could be tempered by gratitude, that protocol could live alongside compassion, and that staying, even sometimes, could change everything. In the months and years after that night, small things changed in ways that revealed larger truths. He learned that presence could be scheduled but also practiced, that a missed bedtime could be made up by a remembered story read with intent rather than distraction. When his son scraped a knee at soccer, he was there to kiss it and to help the boy stand again without making the moment a headline or a lecture. At school recitals he stopped sending apologies in the form of flowers and instead took a seat in the audience. Lena became a quiet fixture of family life rather than a shadow at the edge of service. She was at birthday parties and sometimes in the kitchen telling him what spices to buy when he tried cooking for the boy and found cumin a mystery. He discovered her quick intelligence. She handled schedules, soothed tantrums, and remembered the small preferences that made the house feel like a home. He made adjustments not through orders but through conversations. He ensured her wages were fair and then some. He also made room for training and time off, and he put processes in place so that others in her position would be seen. Once, when he accompanied Lena to a community workshop she supported, he watched children learn to stitch a simple bear. The room was full of laughter and concentration, and he felt an odd humility in seeing how easy affection was when given. He found himself telling stories about the importance of staying, and the parents around him nodded in recognition. It was not grand philanthropy that moved him as much as the small, repeated acts of attention that built trust. The boy grew with the steady knowledge that adults could return and stay. He collected patch toys and thick stories, and he learned the language of gratitude by being taught it at the dinner table rather than by watching it on a screen. Sometimes the billionaire still had to travel. Market demands did not disappear. But the ledger he carried in his head now included nights at home, shared meals, and the knowledge that someone would mend what was torn if he could not be present. The night he had returned unexpectedly no longer felt like a betrayal of protocol but like an initiation that remade his understanding of home. It taught him that the people who live at the margins of our lives often hold the seams together, and that respect and recompense should follow recognition. He never forgot the way his son's face lit when the bear was whole again, and he kept that memory as a small guide, a measure of what truly mattered.